My grandmother was born in Germany, in the part of Germany that's now Poland. It was West Prussia at the time that she was born. The other side of the family is essentially Scotch-Irish. That is to say, the people who were moved off of their farms in Scotland and into Ireland when the British were trying to either discourage the Irish entirely, but maybe somewhere hidden in my heart, it explains why I'm always worrying about refugees and what you can do with people who don't have a place to live. Nebraska's a great place. It's not a place I would want to live forever. And we managed to get around fine on our own. There was a local bus, and I could ride the local bus. So it was good while I was growing up. I did a lot of reading, and one of the things that we managed to get, even in Nebraska in the 1940s, was the Saturday broadcasts of the Met. So the one thing I did with a little non-standard was listen to the opera broadcasts. When I was in high school, you had a choice of an extra course that you took for, I guess, homemaking or something. And the girl students had a choice of taking cooking or sewing, and the male students had a choice of taking auto mechanics or mechanical drawing. When I started teaching calculus after graduate school, I couldn't draw very good pictures on the board because I hadn't taken the course in mechanical drawing. When I was an undergraduate, I majored in math and physics. But I really liked history a lot, and I was contemplating, after graduating from college, going to law school. But the problem was that going to law school cost money, and we weren't starving or anything, but my father had died when I was still in high school. So rather than think too seriously about law school, the National Science Foundation had just decided to throw a lot of money at anybody who was willing to study science or math. So I had several different kinds of grants from the National Science Foundation, the National Defense and Education Act, and then the Fulbright grant, of course, was not necessarily for math, but I studied math in Germany also for a year. So it was always something I enjoyed and found that I was better at it than a lot of other people were. And when I was undergraduate, the person who was the chair of the math department at this small college was very supportive and very encouraging. And the woman who was the registrar at this local small college started the second year I was there persuading me that I should apply for a Fulbright grant and spend a year in Germany. The leading mathematician at the university, it's the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt, the leading mathematician on the faculty was a woman. And there was also another well-known woman mathematician. It was the women who were highly respected and were very good mathematicians that I guess probably helped me decide that that was the career that I could do. The other thing about Frankfurt, the day that all of the tickets in the Opera House were not sold out, students could go down and for 1 mark, which at the time was the equivalent of 25 cents, you could get any of the unused tickets. And so I saw a lot of opera in Frankfurt. And since then, I've spent a lot of time wandering around. I always try to find a math conference that has an opera house in the same town. Makes it much more interesting. So I went back to Lawrence, Kansas, to study mathematics. And that was the first time that I ever had the feeling that somehow women were not supposed to do math, because the very first day in the very first class, the instructor said, as I was walking out of class, "I don't know what you're doing here. A man could be here if you didn't have this fellowship." So then I decided that what you need to do is not get mad. It's not going to get you anywhere to get mad, but you need to get even. So by managing to do better than anybody else in the class, I felt I'd gotten even with that, and nobody else caused me much trouble. It's where I met my husband, and I finished my PhD in Kansas, but he got his master's in Kansas and went on to get his PhD at UCLA, and then we married. Lawrence was nice, small town, had nice hills. It had a boarding school outside of town for Native American boys, and at that time, in supermarkets, it still was the case that we had so-called carry-out boys. So you put the groceries in a cart, and a young man would come out and unload the groceries into your car. But they wouldn't hire any of the boys from Native American boarding school. They didn't even think about having carry-out girls for your groceries. We organized a protest which consisted of you get a grocery cart and you find all the most expensive frozen material. Load up the cars and wheel them up to the checkout counter and then just walk out. And you do a lot of those, and they don't have time to get them all back in the freezer in time, so they suddenly started hiring boys from the local boarding school. So that was nice. It showed that sometimes you could do something about something you objected to, and sometimes it might actually have some effect. I switched over from mathematics to statistics, partly because it wasn't abstract. It was very applied, and I could see, from day to day how you could use the statistics, whereas it was pretty clear that I was never going to change the world studying mathematics. So I took up something that I didn't think I was going to save the world, but at least I might make a little progress in. I got a PhD, was out working for 15 years, and then I went back to law school. American University pays for some tuition for their employees to study at the university. So part of my law school was financed by American University. I used my mathematics a little bit in summer internships that I had at what used to be the National Bureau of Standards in Washington. It's now NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. About the second Friday I worked there, my boss gave me a Fortran manual and told me that by Monday they needed a Fortran program to solve six-degree equations. And I'd never used a computer, never had a computer. So I had to learn programming over the weekend and come up with a program that would work. So I've never gotten away from computers ever since. I had gotten interested and involved early on with some issues of pay equity, in particular pay equity for women, pay equity for underrepresented people in science. Shortly after I went to work for American University, I got a notice of what my retirement benefit would be. A man who had the same money in his retirement account that I did and was expected to live the same number of years would get a monthly benefit that was 15% higher than I. At the time, the Title VII, which says you can't discriminate in employment on the basis of gender, had been passed. So I called up the insurer and said, you can't do this, it's illegal. And so the insurance company said to me, we're not discriminating on the basis of gender, we're discriminating on the basis of longevity. And everybody knows that women live longer than men. So I said to him, well, so you're going to guarantee that I'm going to live longer than my male colleagues? And the guy I was talking to, the lawyer for the company, said, oh, no, you just don't understand statistics. So I decided that he for sure didn't understand statistics, and I did. And I ended up working on a couple of cases that involved exactly the kind of discrimination that I'm talking about, where it was alleged to be longevity instead of gender. We have 86% of the population, men and women, who all die at the same time. So there's no difference based on longevity, so it's discrimination on the basis of gender. And the case eventually got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed. So as a result, all of the men and all the women who have this retirement plan and have the same amount invested in it get the same monthly benefits. What was particularly good is it also, although the court didn't say it had to be, was retroactive. So all of the women who've been living for years, first of all having low salaries and then having low retirement based on that, suddenly got an increase in their retirement benefits. So it was very comforting. And in between the time I started working on the case and the time it had got to the Supreme Court, I went to law school, so I was able to write a brief as a lawyer. American University, again, like many universities, has its cleaning personnel and its dining personnel contracted out. When I came, the people that did this, the people who fed us and the people who cleaned, were employees. And then one day, the day after Christmas, the person who was president of the university at the time fired all of the dining help and fired all of the cleaning help and contracted it out, which was cheaper. The salaries were less, and American has very good benefits, and they were giving no benefits to the contract workers. But the university is always talking about diversifying, and we're sitting in Washington, which certainly has a diverse population. On the other hand, our tuition is high. So we figured if we could get free tuition for the children of the contract workers, that would, first of all, help diversify the student body, but would be a great benefit. Then they would have the same benefit for their children's tuition that our employees had. So we managed to get that. It's a long battle, but we managed to get that. I'm very happy about that. The next thing we looked at was free tuition for the employees themselves, because, as I say, that's how I got my law degree. 2 courses a semester were paid for by the university, and I paid for the rest, but still, it was a great benefit. So a lot of the people who work for us, cleaning or serving in the dining rooms, a lot of them would like to go to the university and get some credit. So far, and it's still a battle, I never give up, what I have managed to get is they can audit courses. There's a story I always tell about observing in meetings of the American Mathematical Society, that there would be a few women there, but none of the major speakers and none of the major officers of the organization were women. And the question was, why not? The number of women getting PhDs in math wasn't very high, but it was higher than the representation in the hierarchy. So I decided to go to a meeting of the Council of the American Mathematical Society to ask what's going on, who makes these decisions, who decides who gets to be the keynote speaker, decides who gets to be the president. But when I arrived at the council meeting, I was told that the council meeting was closed. The bylaws for the American Mathematical Society said that the council meetings were open. So I said to the president of the American Mathematical Society, it says that the meetings are open and doesn't say that they're closed. And he said, oh, it's gentlemen's agreement that we're closed. So I said, I'm not a gentleman, sat down, stayed, decided, yep, I was right. We needed to form our own organization. We got lists of women from programs and asking them to join. And I think we charged something like maybe $5 or something for people to join, maybe $10 if you were a senior mathematician. And it got to be more and more people. We gradually grew, and there got to be more and more women. Originally, we had mainly academic women, but subsequently we've had women who work in industry. One of the presidents was a woman who's at Microsoft. The original goals were largely twofold, just to get women in major roles on programs, so that the chairs of the committees would be women, the major keynote speakers would be women, and eventually the women would be president. The first woman president was Julia Robinson, who was a very well-known mathematician and a very wonderful person, but who, because of nepotism rules, never had a regular appointment at the University of California, Berkeley, until she was elected at the National Academy of Sciences, and they quickly decided to give her a position at Berkeley. Statistics Without Borders is a total volunteer organization. It's not a large foundation like Physicians Without Borders. And what Statistics Without Borders does is free, no charge, helps people who need help in statistics. Generally, there are education or health issues in less developed countries where they don't have the statisticians to work on some of the problems. And they pose problems, and then we get volunteers in Statistics Without Borders to do these things. I was chair of the U.S. section of Amnesty International. One of the things that I did was go around to states which still had the death penalty and talk to either a state attorney general or a governor about why they shouldn't execute the people they had sitting on death row, and sometimes visiting also the people on death row. It was very moving. Also, I chaired the board of an organization called American Middle East Education Foundation for 25 or more years. AMID East, shorthand for American Middle East Education Foundation, has offices in 11 countries in the Middle East and North Africa and headquarters in Washington. And we run programs involving education at all levels in these countries, workforce training, human rights issues. I think it's important, and I always tell my students, try to think how you can use what you're learning and to help somebody. It's great if you get a good job, but it's also important to volunteer. If you've got a skill to give it.